First, we welcome Caitlin, a 19-year-old sportswoman from Scotland who has come to share her story with us this morning.
Growing up, I guess I had a pretty normal life with my mom, my dad, my brother, and my two sisters. I really adored my dad. I was my daddy's girl. With 4 children around the house, it wasn't always easy to get my dad's attention. We did all the family things, went off into the hills, and spent time together having picnics and all sorts of stuff like that. But over a period of time, things started to go down in my house. My parents started to argue a lot, and my home turned into a sad place to be. When I was 9, my dad left, and I was heartbroken. I felt like somebody had just reached into my heart and had pulled it out and thrown it on the floor and was stamping all over it. My mom would often say things about my dad, and I never knew what I should believe and what I shouldn't believe. But it hurt me so much that my dad could just walk out and not want to be a part of our family. I felt really let down. If my dad could just get up and go, he obviously didn't love us. We had to move to a new house, had to leave all my friends behind, and I understood it wasn't easy for my mom to bring up 4 children on her own without any help. Although I didn't always understand what it was, people used to tell me my mom suffered from depression. She cried a lot. Didn't always understand what that was and why she did it, but I knew she wasn't happy, and it didn't make the rest of us feel very happy. She used to shout a lot of things about my dad, and I used to tell myself that it was the sickness talking, and that my mom didn't mean any of it. I know my mom loves us so much, but so often I didn't feel like it. So often I just felt so lonely, like my dad had deserted me and that no one loved me. I felt worthless and completely unloved. I looked around at all these other families. They seemed so perfect, yet mine seemed totally different. It seemed like they had everything and I didn't have anything. I felt like a failure because my parents' marriage hadn't worked. But one thing I loved to do was to play sports. Every minute of the day I could be outside on the streets kicking a ball around, I'd be there. And I used to sit on the hill at the local school with my brother. We weren't able to attend that school, but we used to sit there and we used to watch the boys having their training session, their football session. So wishing that I could just join in. And one day out of the blue, the coach called me down and asked me and my brother if we wanted to join in. So I did. And afterwards, he invited me back to his house to meet his children because they were a similar age to me. I later found out that Dave, the dad, was the youth pastor at the local church. The church was holding a football week in the October holidays, and he invited me along. Towards the end of my week, my coach started talking to me about God's love. He started to share with me how I didn't have to do anything to get God's love. God's love was always there for me from the minute I was born, from the minute that I was conceived. His love was always there for me. He told me about how God loved me so much that he sent his son to die for me on a cross. That God would love me that much that he would send his son to die for me. I didn't feel very loved. I felt worthless and lonely. But hearing about this guy up there, somewhere, I didn't know where, but somewhere that just loved me so much, made me think. I'd heard the Easter story so many times before. I knew that Jesus hung on a cross, but it never meant anything to me. As long as I got an Easter egg on Easter morning, I couldn't care less. But afterwards, the coach came to me. He could see, he knew I'd shared with him throughout the week about my life and about my family situation, and he knew there was some pain and some hurt there. And he sat with me, and I'll never forget what he did. He looked me straight in the eye, and he said, "Caitlin, if you'd been the only person on this earth, God would have still sent his son to die for you." He said, when those nails were driven through his wrists, there was one thought that was going through his head, and that was, I'm doing this for you, Caitlin, because I love you. I love you more than you will ever know. So I went home that night and I thought about that. How can this guy love me more than my parents love me? It just seemed so unreal. A part of me didn't really want to believe it, because you can do anything. That you can have anybody's love, but all you want is the love of your parents. My little sister was desperate to come to church, and I wouldn't let her come because the church was my security. They were my friends. They were my family. It was a place where I went because I wanted to escape everything else in my life. And I thank God today for my little sister and the stubborn girl that she is, because she persisted and she came along on her own, and she sat at the back of the church for years on her own, a couple of years later giving her life to Christ. And now I get the opportunity to tell other kids just how precious they are to God. It's the most amazing thing in the world. The one thing that one of the coaches said to me was, don't worry about things that go on in your life right now, Caitlin, when I was back home, because God has a plan and a purpose. And if you endure it now, you'll see what his plan and his purpose is. And all I've seen his plan and his purpose. Because God is using the things that he allowed me to go through as a youngster to speak to kids on an estate where I live in Bolton, in Johnson Fold in Bolton, that go through exactly the same circumstances that I went through. He is using my life and turning it into good. And it's just incredible to see how God's turned my life around and is using me in the places where I am, just using my testimony to share with other people about how his love can change our lives.